My neighbor used to borrow sugar, then one day, she just stopped answering the door. There's a rhythm to a neighborhood, a quiet and spoken language of borrowed cups of flour and quick waves on the sidewalk. I used to think I knew that language. My neighbor, Eleanor, was a part of that rhythm. She was a woman in her late 70s, a little hunched with age, but with a vibrant sparkle in her eyes. I'm David, and I'm 38 years old. I live next door to a lot of people, but Eleanor was the only one I ever really saw. For a long time, the rhythm of my life was marked by her gentle knock on my door, always for the same thing, a cup of sugar. And then, one day, she just stopped answering her door. It started about 5 years ago, shortly after I moved in. I was unpacking boxes when there was a tentative knock on the door. I opened it to find a small, smiling woman in a knitted cardigan, holding a small, empty cup. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said, her voice a little raspy but kind. "I'm Eleanor. I'm baking a cake and I seem to be a cup short. Do you, by any chance, have any sugar to spare? I'm a private person. I like my space." But there was something about her that disarmed me instantly. Her eyes were warm, and her smile was genuine. I went inside and brought her a cup of sugar. She thanked me profusely, promising to return it. And she did, the next day, with a small, perfect slice of apple cake. It was the most delicious thing I had ever tasted. That was the beginning of our little ritual. It was never a cup of sugar to start. It was always a moment of quiet connection. "I'm baking cookies for my granddaughter, Lily, she's 9, she'd say. She's coming over today." Or, "I'm making my special lemon bars, a recipe my husband, Arthur, used to love." I never saw her granddaughter, and I never met her husband, who, I gathered, had passed away years ago. But through the small, simple act of borrowing sugar, I got to know the shape of her life. I came to expect it. My evenings weren't over until I heard her soft knock. I'd open the door, and there she'd be, with her empty cup and her kind, apologetic smile. We'd talk for a few minutes. She'd ask about my day, about my job. I'd tell her a little bit about myself, about my life. I was just an office worker, a guy who stared at a screen all day. But to her, I felt like a fascinating person. She made me feel seen, in a way that very few people ever had. I started to keep an eye out for her. I'd see her in her garden, a little piece of paradise in the middle of a city. She'd be tending to her roses, her hands in the soil, humming a quiet tune to herself. I'd see her walking to the corner store, her shopping bag small and neat. She was a quiet, steady presence in my life. A comforting one. My wife, Maria, she's 36, would smile when I mentioned Eleanor. "Did she borrow sugar again?" she'd ask, with a gentle laugh. It was a part of our life now. One day, I was making pancakes. I went to grab the sugar and my jar was empty. I felt a strange sense of excitement. I knew what to do. I grabbed an empty cup, walked next door, and knocked. I knocked again. No answer. I figured she was out. I came back inside and waited. I saw her front door, watching it from my window. But it never opened. That night, I saw her lights were off. I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was just tired. The next morning, I saw the morning paper still on her doormat. I felt a small flicker of worry. I knocked on her door. I knocked again. I called her name, just a quiet, tentative call. Nothing. The silence was deafening. It was a complete break from the rhythm. I went back to my place, my heart now a little heavy. A day passed. Then two. The worry turned into something else. It was a mix of confusion and fear. I had no way to contact her. No number. No family. I knew nothing about her beyond the stories she shared over a borrowed cup of sugar. My wife told me to call the police, but I didn't want to overreact. Maybe she had just gone on vacation. Maybe she was with her granddaughter. A week went by, and the paper was still on her doormat. I knew something was wrong. I went to the neighbor on the other side, an older woman named Martha, who was in her 50s. She had been living there for years. I asked her about Eleanor. She didn't know much either. She knew Eleanor was a widow. She knew she had a granddaughter she loved very much, but she never saw any family visit. We decided to call the police. It was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. Explaining to them that I was just a neighbor who borrowed sugar, but that I was worried about her. They were kind, but they also didn't take me very seriously. A few hours later, a police car arrived. I watched from my window as they knocked on her door, and when they got no answer, they let themselves in. I sat there, my heart pounding, a lump in my throat. I couldn't help but think about all the times she had come to my door. All the times I had seen her in her garden. All the times I had taken her kindness for granted. They brought her out on a stretcher. She was covered with a sheet. My heart shattered. I finally knew what had happened. She had been alone. Alone in that house, a place I had always seen as a home full of life, full of baking and memories. I felt a crushing sense of guilt. I was her neighbor. I had seen her almost every day for 5 years, and I never once asked for her number. I never once invited her over for a meal. I never once went beyond the ritual of a borrowed cup of sugar. The silence of her house was now a physical presence. The curtains were drawn. The lights were off. The garden, once a riot of color, was now overgrown and sad. I walked past her door every day, and I felt a profound sense of loss. I felt like I had lost a friend. And I had. A friend I never really knew. A few months later, her granddaughter, Lily, came to the house with a real estate agent. She was a pretty young woman with her grandmother's eyes. She had to be in her 20s by then. She was cleaning the house out, getting it ready to be sold. I finally worked up the courage to talk to her. I told her I was Eleanor's neighbor. I told her about the sugar. I told her about the apple cake. She smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "That sounds like her," she said. She told me that her grandmother was a very private person. That after her husband Arthur passed away, her whole world just shrunk to her home and her garden. That she had lived with a quiet, persistent loneliness. She told me that her grandmother would always talk about the kind young man who lived next door, the one who always had a cup of sugar for her. "She told me you were her only connection to the world outside," Lily said. "She said you were her friend." My heart broke a second time. I had no idea. All this time, I had seen myself as the one doing the favor, the one giving something away. I had never realized that in her eyes, I was the one who was giving her hope. That she had come to rely on our small, simple connection. The house was sold a few months later. A new family moved in. A young couple with 2 kids. They were loud and chaotic and full of life. But for me, the rhythm of the neighborhood was gone. I no longer had my quiet, kind friend next door. The cup of sugar on my counter now feels like a physical reminder of a life I overlooked. The life of a neighbor I thought I knew, but never really did. And her quiet absence is a constant reminder that sometimes, the people who come to your door aren't just looking for sugar. They're looking for a connection. And sometimes, you don't realize how much you need that connection until it's gone.